Just trying to get to. So just kind of orienting ourselves to design thinking. There are various sort of definitions of design thinking you would come across, and they are, I mean, essentially they're all correct. Personally, I refrain myself from calling my process design thinking. I basically consider that just as problem solving. Uh, and mainly because uh, there could be other jokes like, okay, so there is design thinking, so what kind of other thinking is there, and things like that. But first, in my opinion, basically, when you are trying to solve a problem and your intent is to kind of change something from what it currently is, that itself is design. And what design thinking is doing is basically formulating a process which is not typically used in the technical fields or in the product fields, is being able to hold these unknown for a longer period of time to be able to come to a better known. So let's start with this notion of that it is an ability to combine empathy, creativity, and rationality, and more heavily on to meet user needs and drive business success. So it is not only about just one part of the spectrum where we are thinking about the user needs and not worrying about the business success. Design thinking involves all realms of it. So in a typical process, you would start with the user needs and understand where is a user coming from, what are their current needs, what are their current challenges, and basically consider the desirability of a solution. Like, what is the impact currently? What are the challenges they are facing in the society through their products that could be changed, that has a possibility of a change. So you do have an intent of change to make something better for the user. And once you have started on this process, you come up with like various concepts, and then you consider the feasibility and the viability of the solutions that you're putting on the table, and then a solution emerges. Now this diagram is credited to IDEA, of course. So this is a process that they have basically kind of framed it under, and definitely that is the organization that made this process pretty popular over here. So in their process there is this 5 steps, which is discovery, interpretation, ideation, experimentation, and evaluation. And you would notice that typically you start with discovering a challenge and you have defined it, and then you go expand. So the 2 arrows that you see which are going away from each other and then coming back together, this is the divergent and converging sort of methodology. And so in the discovery phase you find like you kind of frame the problem. You define what the problem is, and you go out looking for where does this problem exist, who are the people who are affected by this, and you diverge into this thinking process. And then as you start defining it, you kind of have an interpretation of exactly what is it that the users are facing, and what would be most useful to solve towards. And they start ideating from that point. And the idea generation is again a divergent thinking process where every idea is a good idea, and they would start with that, and then they would start experimenting it, and then evolve it, refine it further. Okay, so this is an idea methodology, but coming closer to home, where in my belief and based on all the academic papers I have read, this process was something that Professor M.P. Ranjan at NID had basically floated around in around late 60s. And this was around this divergent convergent thinking about first starting with the user needs and researching, and then creating scenarios and visualizations for it, and develop the concepts, and then apply those concepts to various business models to understand if these concepts actually support where does it gain, where is the most offering, what are the most gains that you get out of this particular concept, and then picking a concept that has the best results, best outcomes. Okay, so in more recent times, Jake Knapp at Google Ventures is applying this process to support all the ventures that come through their organization. So they support new ventures or new startups and are kind of like an incubator unit of Google. And this is their process, literally whiteboarded in terms of thinking, understanding the users, understanding the needs, then diverge into thinking of various solutions, decide on a solution, prototype it, and validate it. So you would start noticing that typically there are 4 to 5 steps. Some people would say there are about 7 steps, including the validation and execution of it. But it pretty much follows the same path. Now, the process framework I typically use in terms of framing my project or estimating it or figuring out what are the steps I need to take, I basically use these 5 steps, which is discover, define, design, develop, and deliver. And delivery could actually involve testing, validating along with it. But that doesn't mean that we don't test and validate in the design phase itself. So design phase itself is an iterative process, and that is where you also test and validate your concepts at a very sort of low fidelity level. So during the discovery phase, you understand the challenge and figure out who is it that is facing this challenge and most affected by it. And then you define the problem. So problem definition is the key part of this process. Like if you try to get to the solution very soon, then you're not doing the process right. Defining the problem, what is it that you want to solve, will actually help you further down the stream. Framing the opportunities in a variety of ways, like you want to kind of look at various scenarios and can look into creating these scenarios based on either who is most impacted, what is the pricing, what are the outcomes, what is the emotions that we want to deliver, and kind of go from there. You definitely want to consider that what is that end emotion that you want to deliver for these users, and like what is it that they would feel if this problem did not exist for them. And a typical solution, typical kind of way to frame this is that I'm going to use an analogy of a simple solution that you wake up and you don't have milk at your home and the milkwala does not deliver the milk. So one of the challenges is that you don't have milk at home. And then you start going through that aspect of like, now I have to solve this problem. And a very obvious solution that comes to your mind would be like, go ahead and go to the local convenience store and go pick up milk. And that is a very sort of simple problem solution. It's just you're jumping to the solution right there. But if you fundamentally think about why you need milk to begin with, and you kind of considering that just because you don't have milk at home. And in that condition, you would start thinking, I need my morning breakfast and I need the nutrition that comes with it, and so I need milk. And then you can start, because you framed the problem in a way about what the outcome is supposed to be, that you need to get the morning breakfast and the nutrition that comes out of it, you can consider alternative solutions that solves the same challenge. But if you just just focus on milk by itself, then your solution will just be oriented in trying to force you to go to a trip to the convenience store and get milk. Okay? So moving forward, like there are methods within this process that you need to find the needs and benchmark that. And when I say benchmarking, it is being able to say that if this need was solved for this many users or this particular segment, then what are the gains that you would get out of it? So you kind of you want to get as close to the definition of the problem, of the need, of the trends, the markets, the future trends, what's coming, what is present, and what is going to come in the future, and be able to kind of start with that. You also want to use design thinking methodology for wicked problems, which are ill-defined and tricky, that doesn't have an obvious solution. Like one of the examples I would give for that is the B2B sites, or some sort of like, let's just take shopping cart, right? I mean, a shopping cart is a very simple, it has taken years to solve that shopping cart issue in terms of what it is supposed to be, but basically you know that you put something, you are buying something online, you put something in your cart, and then you go through a checkout process, and that pattern has been established long enough that you can do some sort of optimization on it, but it does not require design thinking. Versus there are some challenges that require design thinking where you want to find alternative solutions that could lead to innovation, that could lead to some sort of a different alternative way of uh, delivering some meaning or emotions to the end user. Okay, so so you want to benchmark that. There is a process of divergent and convergent thinking that I have touched upon very briefly, which is where you first start with a problem, which is a smaller thing, and then you diverge into more sort of like figuring out for whom does this problem exist and how far and wide is this challenge sort of prevalent. And then you start converging on defining exactly what is it that you want to do. You also have an outcome that is defined. So you kind of converge in kind of saying, I want to deliver happiness, I want to deliver accomplishment, I want to deliver wonder. Disney's goal basically as a value proposition is delivering wonder to people. And so you kind of make sure that your value proposition is well defined, and then you start kind of diverge again back into various solutions and various ways to kind of deliver that. You also try to kind of diverge into the various channels and various methodologies of doing that. So we will kind of touch upon it a little further down in the tips. It is collaborative and tangible. So you have to work together with the teams, and you have to be tangible. You cannot be just having design thinking in your head. It is a very sort of tangible process where you kind of create this quick drawings, sketches, prototypes, and then kind of validate it with people around you, or go out on the field and talking to people who are affected by that and being able to kind of test it against them or with them. So it is extremely tangible. It is not something that you just solve in your head or on your computer, on your desktop, and then basically come back with a solution. Again, we have talked about defining and designing. So there's the divergent and convergent piece itself is like there is a definition which is more sort of converging aspect of it, and designing which ends up becoming divergent at times and then picking up the right solution and converging back into it. You create and test. So these are some sort of methods within this process that you basically are repeating over and over again. And here is another sort of a diagram by Nathan Shedroff, and he basically has this design MBA program at CCA over here, and where they actually talk about this first figuring out what kind of business should like what kind of venture or business should you be in, and what is it that you should make and offer to the users. And so this divergent and convergent thinking starts all the way from the business and the product definition perspective, and then as you move down the stream in terms of concept creation and planning on how you want to deliver that or how you should make it happen, you again go into this series of converging divergent thinking, which is very iterative. So coming back to the main part of this presentation is the tips, the 5 tips. So I'm going to kind of, I know it seems that I'm repeating myself, but it is something that the 5 tips are the great takeaways for everyone over here. It is basically start with a problem definition and a lot of optimism. So one of the quotes by Albert Einstein is that if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes defining it and 5 minutes solving it. And this is the crux of design thinking. It might seem that there is a lot of procrastinating, but if you were physically in the process of collecting various ideas in terms of brainstorming through that in a group of people with the stakeholders, it's not as much about this procrastinating as much as physically doing something and kind of working towards a solution. So one of the key part is that if you have the problem well defined, and rather than being cynical about it, it requires a lot of optimism. So typically, one of the things that I have experienced a lot of is that when I work with product or engineering units, they basically have this notion about, oh, but we're going to face this and we don't have the technology feasibility and this would be costing too much earlier in the process. So you need a lot of optimism to kind of start saying that let's keep pricing as a constant right now. Let's kind of think that everything will work properly the way we want to, and then start like first figuring out what is it that we could deliver if we solve this problem, rather than trying to figuring it out whether this is a huge problem, too large a problem, it cannot be done, whether it is within our realm or not. So it requires extremely a lot of optimism for this. Okay, so that is the first tip. The second is that it is everyone's problem and not just the designer. So it is not like, oh, the design department is solving this problem. You as product owners, you as product managers are equally vested in this. And so it is something that requires everybody to be hands-on on this one. Otherwise, it's kind of a waterfall process and it's not design thinking in its true sense. You need to be involved in terms of saying like contributing to who the stakeholders are, what are their needs, and what are the possible scenarios that needs to come into play, or what are the scenarios that you want to consider. So I also find this a challenge, like in my experience at my recent experience consulting at Apple, which seems to be like such a great epitome of a design-centric company. But one of the challenges I faced over there was that the design departments are very highly esteemed, and I was brought in as a consultant within the design team, and they would not collaborate with the product teams or the engineers to deliver the problem. They actually wanted to have a solution before we presented to them, and so they were definitely not practicing design thinking within the unit in which I was supporting at the moment. So it was not design thinking at all. It is basically a very much sort of like, we are the experts and we will hand you the solution and then you can execute on that. In design thinking process, there is no such thing of this expertise. Designers are facilitators of this process, and everybody is a designer in terms of what you kind of bring to the table. Okay. Set realistic goals. Expecting solutions right away is unrealistic. So realistic goals is not about talking about the limits of what the solution could be or what that would lead us to be, but more about thinking in terms of like, what is our success criteria? And typically the success criteria you want to kind of define is more focused on what is the emotion that we want to deliver to the users, or what is the meaning, the purpose for this particular exercise, and what is it that we want to kind of, what are the outcomes that you want to set earlier, like define earlier in the process. But then expecting that you kicked off the process and then you go back to the team and saying, but I need to see mock-ups, I need to see solutions, I need to see that, and that is some sort of like a challenge even for the designers, is that when the expectation is like, yes, we want you to do design thinking, but I don't have time to kind of be participant of it, but when can I see the markups, when can I see the concepts or solutions, that is unrealistic. You also don't want to converge and focus on the first solution too soon, because then you would not consider the alternative ways of solving that same challenge. Okay. Do not limit ideas or parameters. And again, speaking on from this experience at Apple, I was tasked on working on improving the awareness and adoption of intranet site. But my parameters for redesign were limited to the site redesign. So even though the challenge was about let's kind of improve the awareness about this particular site, that people, when they have problems, when they have IT needs, that they should be able to come to the site and find the solutions they need. The biggest challenge was that how do you even get people to this site without, if part of our design solution is only supposed to be the site redesign, at the most improve search and SEO, it kind of limits it. You want to make sure that the parameters should be open to some sort of a new hire orientation content, some sort of like a booklet or other ways that people will know that this site does exist to help them resolve their challenges and problems and meet their IT needs. So limiting the parameters earlier on, or just in terms of when you start or kickstart the project itself, is not the design thinking process. It is basically you limiting already, and the scope of the project is so limited that basically you just have to kind of work with that parameter to come up with a solution. That does not mean that you cannot consider the parameters once you have gone into the design phase. But setting those parameters earlier on in the discovery and definition phase will limit the kind of solutions that you will be able to get out of it. Okay. And the final one, the solutions should be phase, not limited. So what I mean by this is you want to deliver the meaning or the emotion or the outcome that you first started off with as part of your minimum viable product. This will ensure the adoption and the virtuous cycle of the repeat users and a high net promoter score. So people will end up going ahead and repeating, coming back to use your product, or recommending it to other people, and then being able to kind of make the product successful. But if your first phase of the product is basically stripped down to just some sort of functionality, then it is not delivering the emotions or the kind of experience that you set out to deliver. So so just don't keep it limited, but actually take a slice of one minimum. The aspect of their mini MVP should deliver the full gamut of what is it that you want the end user to have. Okay, so you might want to cut down on bells and whistles of the features, but that one thing that actually solves that challenge, you absolutely need to deliver that. So again, I'm going to kind of have the slide where all of these 5 tips are up there, and I'm going to open it up for questions. So questions? If there are no questions, I might actually walk you through a design, sort of conceptual design process itself, that where we implemented this design thinking. But I would like to see if there are any questions. There is a lot of content that we've gone over here. So if there's Nilesh, you think there are any questions that are online?
Yeah, so in the question box, there are 2 questions, like how to take care of cultural design.
Cultural design meaning like, I would assume that that would be basically saying that if you're coming back with a solution and you are trying to figure out if this solution is relevant for, let's say, North India and South India, or basically US or China, um, or European countries or Brazilian countries. When you start with the parameters of definition of your problem, you are defining who your audience is, the target audience is, and your stakeholders are. And in the design thinking process, you would basically go to the field and start working with those people in understanding what their challenges and what their problems are and what their current needs are. So there is a huge aspect of upfront work that needs to happen in terms of doing the market insights, the trends, the kind of the cultural aspects of that society, that region, and then kind of start with that. And this happens in your discovery phase. So basically, you definitely need to start with the discovery phase, understand like who your audience is, and then being able to kind of frame those challenges with those cultural issues in mind. So this is something that needs to happen upfront. It's not something that you kind of do at the end of the process. So unlike in other product sort of life cycles where you have defined the product, designed it, and then you basically send it out to your regional managers to validate that content as well as just the product functionality. Unlike that, design thinking really wants you to do that field study upfront. Okay.
Yeah. So next question is from Anuj. Like there are 5 tips. So what are any examples for those 5 tips? Where to implement and how?
Um, yes, and I think if this is uh, these 5 tips can be applied everywhere, as simple as running out of milk problem. I think, I mean, in the product scenarios, depends on where you, what kind of organization you are in, and what kind of are you starting with design thinking in that organization itself. I think people who are trained in design thinking should be the facilitators within their organizations to start this process. So it could be any challenge, big or small, and but depending on what your organization is trying to solve at that time. But you can apply it to anything. But as I said, the most efficient use of design thinking is for these hairy problems, and those hairy problems could be as simple as that currently pharmaceuticals have a huge stake in delivering healthcare to the end user, and it is a problem because it is not transparent. So take something that is really the big elephant in the room that you cannot really solve otherwise, and it would actually benefit from the collaboration from different point of views. Having a huge empathy for the end user, like the empathy part, and this is where we go back to that first slide about design thinking, is applying what are the pain points with that lack of transparency for the end user, and kind of start with framing the problem from that perspective rather than trying to frame the problem from solving it from a systematic perspective. And when you start it from the user's perspective, uh, you have a purpose, the team has a purpose, and you would basically try to hold that as your sort of the end sort of delivery that you want to kind of keep working towards and be passionate about. So Anuj, I don't know if that answered your question, but if we have opportunity to go through that, I'll actually walk through a case study on how to apply that. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Nilesh?
Yeah. So there is a question box over there, and in front of the people there are question marks. If you can see that.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. So there are lots of questions in the queue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somehow I can't see them all, so I'm trying to figure out. No, I can't see them.
Okay, sure. I will say for you. So after defining problem, where and when to stop and end the process?
Um, that is a great question because you don't want to go into this ever like just this constant cycle of just designing and applying designing thinking or just divergent and convergent thinking. But one of the things to understand is that first you have actually defined a problem, understood user needs, and then you go very, very kind of wide in terms of who is affected by this. And then you kind of start figuring, coming up with concepts. And the best way to kind of start kind of converging again is to start grouping the concepts rather than trying to kind of say this concept is a good concept or a bad concept and taking it out. First try to kind of group them into, does this solves the pricing part of it, this solves this aspect of it, this solves a future scenario. This solves a problem. It improves from the status quo, but it is not transformative. So kind of start kind of doing some level of affinity mapping, grouping these solutions into various categories to see which one or which ones of these categories actually have the best outcomes. And that way you kind of like converging on some solution and saying, you know, for this particular challenge and this aspect of it, this seems to be like these group of solutions will actually make most sense. And then this is where you start kind of applying some level of feasibility, viability aspect of the solution, like given how soon you want to deliver this, what is the MVP that you can deliver of the kind of end results that you want. So at every point of way, you are taking this huge set of data, huge set of concepts, huge set of design solutions, and then kind of grouping them into smaller categories. And then at some point you realize we've covered all aspects of it. Like, I think the best part about the design, the process itself leads you into this aspect of, I think we've covered it all. We've covered every single audience member that, or every single targeted group that gets affected by it. We've covered this. So you've already, the process itself will lead you to, like, you know, there's kind of a silence in the room, a kind of a place where I think we've got it all. And go about asking this couple of times around the room or yourself if you're working through this, is like, is this all? And sometimes, you know, some of the ridiculous things that people are holding back as some sort of they find that, oh, people might think this is a silly solution. They might be holding back. So encourage them to come out with it. But there might be a time when you've exhausted them all, and then kind of start applying that to the rationale. So this is where the rationale comes into place. So you kind of converge with that, and then ultimately you will have some solutions, and that you can apply again various scenarios and then end it. Okay, so this does end. Typically, if even in a product life cycle, if you give like a very simple challenge, I usually give overall a long process, about 6 weeks. But Jake Knapp from the Google Ventures, he basically does every aspect of design thinking. The 5-step process is a 5-day process. So you can apply this in literally a 20-minute scenario, or try to solve this in 20 minutes, or you can do it over the 5 days. But what they basically do is they basically give themselves time to just go ahead and go wide, and then narrow down, and go wide, and then narrow down. And at the end of it, each day is assigned to that phase of the project. Okay, so sometimes setting time limits on your project can also help. Okay, next question.
That I think so that answer will help the question. So another question is how to handle the unexpected challenges in these 5 points process.
There should not be unexpected challenges, first and the foremost thing. If you have basically done the due diligence of discovering and defining your problem statement or the challenge you have on hand, there shouldn't be unexpected things that could come up. So unlike product life cycle where there are scope creeps that come up, earlier on you in the design thinking process, earlier on you have every single scenario, every single challenge already kind of well defined, and you're getting a buy-in from all of the people, all the stakeholders, all of the people working on this project, and saying, now this is what we're solving towards, right? We're not solving for this. So you move to the next phase by having this consensus from everybody saying we're not solving for this, right? We're basically moving on to just converging on these aspects. Like within an audience, let's say that you want to deliver, again I will say milk. And so like if you basically going into like saying who is our ultimate audience member, and then your wife would say, okay, we only need milk for the 2 kids, not for everybody right now. We can do without it right now. So you'll be like, now you have kind of narrowed down, and the scope creep isn't like you already gone to the convenience store and you get a phone call and saying, no, we have 5 more guests. So that is an unexpected challenge versus having defined exactly what you need upfront will actually make the process much more easier downstream. Okay.
So another question is, what is the difference between user segmentation and user persona?
User segmentation and what?
Personas.
Sorry, Nilesh, that cut.
User persona.
User segmentation and user personas. That's a great question. So uh, segmentations are real. Basically, segmentations can be broken down by region, age, capabilities, uh, various aspects of it, use, and that is your market. Basically, segmentation is related to market, versus persona is a very sort of design thinking, design-centric process where you coming up with personas. They are made up. They are not real. They are the archetypes of those segments. So they represent those segments, and you have a story around them. But in a segment, you can say that there are 5 million people using iPhone versus a Samsung Galaxy, and that's your segment. Okay, so the segment is iPhone users and Samsung Galaxy users. Uh, but then coming to a specific story in kind of creating a persona, which is a made-up persona, in saying um, so and so person, like John, uh, an iPhone user, is 35 years old, who lives in an urban area, who has 2 kids, and who has a job that pays this much. You kind of creating a story of that one representative person of that segment. Okay, so that's the key difference between the persona and the segments. Okay.
Yes. So another one is like how to adopt the different screen resolutions for same processes like mobile, tab, laptop, etc.
Um, this is very sort of product centric question rather than a design thinking uh, sort of question. So one of the things about design thinking is it's very sort of prototype driven. So as you refine the solutions, and when you kind of consider the feasibility and the viability aspect of it, at that time you need to identify what are the best sort of channels and the best sort of platforms and resolution. So these are all things that are actually more sort of execution centric, and it's more sort of like not something that happens during the design thinking process, but more sort of in the execution part of it, like how do we do it in the Nathan's diagram that we saw something on the right hand side. So this is, again, you then kind of look at your segments, your market trends in terms of who are your users, what are the most used channels, what are the most used devices, what are the most used resolution on those devices that are currently prevalent in the market. One of the things I touched upon, maybe not probably very well, is that scalability is something you want to consider in design thinking process. So not this process is not something that you want to apply just for today, but something that you want to kind of consider what is coming down the stream for the future. So so you do want to kind of consider adoption, what are the trends, what are the different things that people are using. So is it like a mobile, like in some scenarios, like when I talked about the intranet part of it, thinking that we want to redesign a website is not, it's very limiting, because the very aspect that people are on the go, and when I face a challenge or I have a problem, it's not only on my desktop. Nowadays I might have a problem with my iPad or my iPhone or whatever else. This was in context of Apple, so of course just devices that are Apple oriented. You could have a problem with your printer, right? I mean, in your office space, and it's not working, and you have your phone with you. You don't have your desktop next to your printer. So you have to consider those contexts and frame the problems based on that. So upfront you've already framed that, but downstream in terms of execution, you need to know exactly what you need to narrow it down for. So consider that as part of your discovery process in terms of your present or a future aspect, but in terms of actually just getting to the nitpicky details of the pixels and all, you want to do that during the execution phase. Okay.
Yeah. So another one is design thinking of use pharma product development.
Yes, absolutely. So pharma product development is again actually a lot. I would say there is not a problem in the world that cannot apply design thinking. So pharma product development is basically you are considering let's say a drug that cancer drug or some sort of a diabetes drug or something like that, and your main problem is that you are again thinking about there are these many people affected by cancer or these many people affected by diabetes, and then you want to start framing it like what are the current challenges of existing solutions and what are the problems with it. Like if you think about cancer patients have to go through chemotherapy, and that actually disabilitates them from their current lifestyle and the way of living, and you want to solve that problem. Now, do you want to solve that for every cancer patient or cancer patients that are just focused on leukemia, which requires a lot more chemotherapy treatments and stuff like that? So I think you can start from there, and then based on who your audience is, how soon that drug needs to actually be effective, that it is not related to chemo, but then you are again like going through the design thinking process, and then as you come through your solutions, you're thinking, is it as good or as impactful as, is it changing the lifestyle for people who are going through chemo, or is it similar? Like I take the pill and it still makes me feel as crappy as I feel when after my chemotherapy. Then you've solved it by like saving them a visit to the hospital, but at the same time, how are they feeling is similar. So you haven't really gained a whole lot with the impact. So I hope that this example was helpful in thinking that this can be applied anywhere.
Yeah.
It's so hard when I don't get feedback.
So actually the participants are on mute and
Yeah.
yeah. So actually we are having a LinkedIn group also where they will be
Okay.
posting the questions and we can
Okay.
start the discussions over there also.
Sure. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. So I will be sharing the link with all the participants. And the last question we can go ahead with, how should the empathy mapping be ensured during the design process?
The I think the empathy part is you would not lose sight of the empathy once you have gone through the discovery process about how people feel. So I will give you an example. The example that I was going to walk you through is more sort of like patients who have to take regular medication for just managing and maintaining their wellness, right? So typically we end up thinking that okay, now you have this ailment and you take this medication and you take this medication, and for people who have your parents or grandparents who have to take these 10-15 medication and then they have to keep up with that and remember when to take them, it really requires like a full-time caretaker job to actually help them manage that, and it is a problem. I mean, not taking it regularly actually hampers their wellness. So you have to put yourself in their shoes. You have to put yourself in the shoes and saying, well, you have to take the medication. It's not that easy. Sometimes, gulping down all those medication is hard. Remembering when to take them is hard. being dependent on somebody is difficult. So there are lots of challenges around there. So you have to put yourself in their shoes, put yourself in the same environments in which they operate, and be able to kind of map it for. So which is where the customer journeys, creating those customer journeys for these users um, is very helpful.
Yeah, I think so. It will answer the question. So another last one is like, what are the tools that can be used in general processes?
Um, Personally, a sticky note, Sharpie pens, pencils, and a space and basically being able to go out in the field. It is more about your time and your intentions of bringing that change that matter a whole lot more than your tools per se. Uh, I mean, India, especially with their jugaad mentality, you see uh, these solution-centric attitude everywhere around you. So it does not require as much of tools as much as your intent to solve that problem. So and in fact, because we have this kind of mentality of jugaad, it is much easier to just take whatever is available at the moment. And in a lot of times when you want to create a quick prototype, just take the materials that are available to you, whether it is like paper plates or like literally some matchsticks and this little things to put things together. So prototyping should not be limited by what you have and what you don't have. It's not about limitations, about like you can create quick paper prototypes by just drawing something or creating some pseudo sort of boxes and stuff like that. So more and more as I work with this process, I'm less and less dependent on digital tools. Okay.
So here are the answers for all the questions. So anyone can write the question over there if they are having, or we are having. I have shared the LinkedIn group link also. You can start the discussion over there.
Okay, great. So
So
I will definitely go to the LinkedIn group to, and any follow-up questions that you might have.
so
Okay.
thank you Dolly a lot for your valuable time for in the webinar, and thank you attendees for attending the webinar. We'll be in touch in the LinkedIn, and just add the group into your profile. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
everybody.
And
Thanks for the
the
opportunity.
PPT and the recording will be shared to you all. Thanks.